I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is the Readathon. And I'm here with my other partner in crime, Mel Barrett. Mel, hello.
Hey, Rebecca.
Who are you exactly?
As I mentioned the other day, I'm a surgeon.
Okay.
And a lawyer.
Yeah.
And my day job is I'm a podcaster, and I have a podcast called the In Between Podcast, and it is an investigative true crime podcast, and you can listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, I'm also a lawyer and a pathologist and a crash reconstructionist. And now a widely renowned TV commentator to boot.
Apparently, Court TV. Look at you. You crushed it.
Yeah, I'm coming back. They asked me back for Monday.
Oh, good. That's amazing.
Yeah, of course, Monday I'm very busy, so I have no idea how I'm going to keep up Monday, but I'll try. I'll do my best. All right, so let's talk about what happened in court today. Today is June 6th, 2025, and we got our long-awaited superficial section, super cute expert, Dr. Wolfe from ARCAA on the stand. Mr. Dimples. Well, you know, it's so funny because I always refer to this as me being superficial on the podcast. Look at my Bernadoodle here, speaking of superficial. But there is something about, court is, unfortunately, an adversarial process. And juries in 2025 in a criminal trial do expect, I think, a show. They expect a story. They expect fireworks. And you see in Sue O'Connell's jury observations that she's talking about, the juror who gets excited when there's adversarial questioning, etc. So I'm sorry. I'm the one. It's my turn to have a dog tonight. There's a thunderstorm and he's very anxious.
It's very sweet. He's just like sniffing your head and being very sweet.
And so I don't think that Dr. Wolfe's just objective cuteness is unimportant to a jury. I mean, that sounds stupid.
No, not at all. I mean, I understand what you mean. I don't necessarily, he's not angry. There's no anger in his face. He's got a very kind demeanor. The only time I saw him actually today have a moment that sparked something in him that looked like it could be anger was when Hank Brennan brought up his wife.
Yes. Because as we know, Dr. Wolfe was the subject of some anti-Karen Read online harassment after trial one, as was his family. But it should be out of bounds to discuss that because a husband and wife are two separate people with separate interests, separate online lives. And he was asking him about her social media activity or tagging in some pro-Karen Read stuff. And I think about this, like, one thing that, we have a rule and it's very common in journalism is about our ability to display anything political or be overtly political, right? And in my company's, my day job's journalistic code of conduct, it addresses spouses. Basically, it says, we recognize that you are not your partner. If your partner chooses to display a political sign or something, be aware that it could create an impression of bias. However, have that conversation with your spouse, and you obviously can't stop them from putting the sign on the line. So it's like, it's a judgment call. And I think the whole thing of like, I'm separate from my spouse is important here. What do you think?
I agree. The only thing I can think of in my head right now is Justice Alito's wife flying the upside down flag. And
Dr. Wolfe is not on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, and they both own that home. Right. Yeah. So it's like, I'm just saying, not exactly the same, but you're not wrong. Know.
Well, it's funny because my point is that he differentiated himself from his wife. He was like, my wife did that, not me. Yeah. And it was just like, okay. In this situation that happened today, Hank led the questions with, is anyone close to you in favor of one side or the other, which is his favorite line of questioning for cross, I guess. And Wolfe was like, I don't know. And I don't think so. No. And he was like, you're sure about that? No one in your family. And he was like, my family? And I don't know. I don't think so. And he was like, how about your wife? And he was like, my wife. And he got like, I was like, ooh, he got a little anger right there. And then.
And hearts all over America swelled with lust.
Well, the funny thing is that he went on to explain that it was his wife after he testified. the whole world exploded about how cute he was and how smart he was and how nice he was. And they were all telling his wife on social media that her husband is an awesome superstar, hottie, whatever.
Crash daddy.
And she was like, she said something along the lines of like, oh, that's so sweet. Oh, I love him too. You know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But she responded a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah. God forbid.
And because of, I mean, it was so innocuous. It was just so stupid that he was even going down that road, just grasping at straws. But it was sort of, you know, it set up the rest of his cross is that he was grasping at straws.
All right. So I have a big technical take from today before we go through everything that happened. Do you want to hear what my technical take is?
Yes, please.
All right. So we saw, I guess we're just getting into what happened. We saw that ARCAA conducted some incredibly, you talk about a jury wanting like film level shit, like evidence and trial. They got it today because ARCAA has a lab with a pneumatic arm that they can do impact testing with. They showed that. Then they showed this outdoor testing. They also have an exemplar vehicle, which I was actually kind of happy to see. And they did all this outdoor testing with Randy the crash test dummy and then also an arm suspended from a crane. And they tried all these different things. And basically the thing to know is that they were hired for this trial to examine the work of ARCCA and do testing around that. They were not hired for this trial to be like, let's start fresh with nothing. It was literally that. So what I saw today, because one of the shots that they have of these test vehicles is a drone shot of up in the air. So that, imagine if you haven't seen it, listeners, the exemplar vehicle is in a giant parking lot, big long parking lot, and has to back up to the speed that they're planning to test in order to hit the dummy or the dummy arm or whatever, okay? Here's what I noticed. In order to achieve the speed, even like 17 and 24 miles per hour, that car had to be really far away.
Really far away. Yep.
Really far away.
Yep.
And I've been thinking this. What is the theory that Karen Read backed up from a quarter mile down the street and you know what I mean? Because it looks
they said
like
it was only 50 some odd feet or 60 some odd feet. There's no way.
There's no way. And it's funny because they keep testing this particular trigger, 1162, which again, I people who disagree with me, I'm sorry, but this trigger was assigned a time. It was assigned a time based on another event from the car. And
they created the time.
There was assigned a time based on what they think was the same 3-point turn that she reported making that night, without considering how the other use of that car afterward and whether or not, for instance, that backup event could be the result of testing that was done by the Trooper Prawl Brigade. So I'm just saying we don't know for sure but that doesn't even matter because they're saying that the trigger event captures the 5 seconds before and the 5 seconds after. Even if you're backing up and accelerating and you get up to 24 miles per hour and you're continuing to accelerate before there's any collision, and we know there wasn't a collision during the recording of the trigger event, and so there probably wasn't a collision, but we know that, she would have to have been way the hell down the street. And we saw in the videos and the map, like there is no way, it's not a huge straightaway, Fairview Road, is it?
No. And we talked about this the other day. Like, let's go with their theory and let's say she was that far away and backing up. We also saw how hard it was for that SUV to stop.
Yes.
On a dime. You can't stop on a dime. And actually, Hank Brennan made that point. You can't stop on a dime. And that means that she would have hit Higgins' Jeep or whoever was parked behind her at the time. Because based on where John's body was and where they're saying he was in the road, which he wasn't in the road, Higgins' Jeep was only a car length behind her. Or the next car was only a car length behind her.
Correct.
So they're saying that she went forward. The whole entire maneuver was 80 some odd feet. So she went forward 30 some odd feet and came backwards 50.
I don't think that's possible given what we saw today.
There's no way. There's no way.
I just don't. And I'm curious to know, I mean, how wrong, but they had a professional crash reconstruction driver driving that car, and clearly there's sensors.
That's what the lines on the ground were for.
Yeah,
and so they could have a guide.
And they're a non-drinking, completely sober.
No snow.
No snow.
I can't hear.
And, you know, there's just a lot of questions there. So let's go back. One of the things I learned today about Dr. Wolfe was that he wrote his doctoral dissertation on the acrylic material that Karen Read's taillight was made from. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on that magic glass where you have, I know it's not called smart glass, where it's clear and then it's not. And a big component of that is that exact material. Were you surprised to hear that?
I was very surprised. I had no idea. I feel like we should have learned that from the last trial, but I don't think they were able to. I mean, I was so excited about the depth they were able to get into today on direct, because I feel like they couldn't touch anything during the last trial because of the issue with the feds.
Yeah.
I will say Alan Jackson tried many times to get very close to the feds, and Hank Brennan really, really, really shut his direct down.
He shut
in the
so
beginning.
much down. He shut so much down. And Bev allowed it. And I was watching the cross later today, some of the cross, and she was not sustaining objections. By the way, listeners, if you hear snoring, that is my dog.
And you might hear it from Rubes too.
So it's fine. We have double dog snoring tonight, and that's just going to have to be fine. What were you going to say?
We have dogs. It's like, what I was going to say is that she was allowing, we'll obviously get to cross in a little bit, but the cross is sticking out to me right now. So when Brennan was objecting during direct, it was an immediate sustain. I think she may have she sustained everything except for 2 objections. And there were 3 or 4 sidebars during direct. And then when Brennan was doing his cross and there would be an objection, she'd either say, I'll allow it, or she would turn to Dr. Wolfe and she'd say, well, can you answer that? And he would say to her, not the way he's asking it, not the way he's phrasing it. No, I can't. And she would be like, okay, next question.
Yeah.
And then he would ask the same question again.
He was so chill. He was so calm. He held up very well, in my opinion.
He held up very, very well. And the thing that really bothered me, though, about her allowing the questioning to go on, Alan Jackson was objecting, and he was objecting on the mathematical portion or the scientific portion of the question that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
That Bev didn't even understand. So how can she allow it?
No one understood.
But that's my point.
Yeah.
How can she allow the question if she herself doesn't understand it?
Right.
Because when she says, can you answer that? And he says, not the way it's being asked.
Right.
So anyway, back to the direct. He was getting, toward the beginning, Alan Jackson was getting stopped up a lot. And it was really, it was stunted almost.
Yeah.
Like he couldn't get anything out. He established that they were hired not by the defense and not by an insurance company.
Right. At the very end in redirect, he was able to ask the insurance company question because Hank opened that door.
Right. But the first time he asked it, Hank objected and she sustained it, which is so screwed up,
So
I mean, that question they should have been able to ask that question. Did an insurance company hire you?
Well, we know that it's important because after the first trial, one of the jurors that was interviewed explicitly said they were very confused who hired ARCAA. They thought it was Karen Read's insurance company. So that's why Hank asked the question as one of his first questions on cross, because he wanted to plant that idea. Yeah. Which is both clever and mean at the same time. So can we talk about this testing? Because I felt like I was watching like literally what you imagine like it would be like. And these things are never as cool as you think they're going to be. And they literally had a robot pneumatic arm. And by the way, they used a sweatshirt for reasons. And not only did they use a sweatshirt, they found the exact same sweatshirt with the exact same fabric, so that they could test the veracity of the claim that these shards of plastic poked multiple holes in John O'Keefe's arm and through his shirt. Now, we should mention also that Dr. Wolfe is not the body guy. He's the car guy. So when asked a bunch of questions on cross about an injury and stuff, he's like, that's not my job. And I hope that landed. But it was very, very clear what his job was. Mm-hmm. Those tests were cool. And the bottom line from all the testing, the indoor testing and the outdoor testing, was that the shirt rips were never replicated, and the taillight breakage, while it existed, which I think it's good that some taillight breakage existed, because it shows that they have nothing to hide there, didn't come close to matching the Karen Read taillight.
Well, and very specifically, when you look at, so I put in our notes a side by side of the end result of Karen Read's taillight. I always say it's after, MSP and CPD got a hold of it. There's no red, basically. It's completely busted open. And then it's compared to the test that Dr. Wolfe did. And if you look at the test that Dr. Wolfe did, yeah, it's smashed. There's a lot of red still left over. But the most amazing thing is that it's the outer taillight that's smashed, not the diffuser,
right?
Not the inner taillight. And they're trying to say, the prosecution is trying to say that it was smashed all the way down through the diffuser. The diffuser is like, I can't remember how many millimeters or how,
I think they said it was about an
is.
inch inside the taillight. There was a gap. Yeah. And then, so if you think about how physics works, like if you hit something with that taillight, that the outer part is going to absorb a lot of the impact, right? And with it smashing, sort of release that energy. Listen to me remembering my high school physics. And so the impact would have to be significant with a large mass in order to get punched through the extra inch of air and break that thing. And they were never able to achieve breaking that reflector the way it's broken in Karen Read's taillight.
They did it. So the experiments they did were inside in the lab. They did 10 mile an hour, 17 mile an hour. And then outside they did 29 miles per hour and 24 miles per hour. And the 24 is obviously what the DA is saying that it was going. So the inside
Where did you hear
experiments
24 from, though, Mel? Sorry, it was just a call
I'm
back.
not trying to be malicious.
Just a call back to Dr.
I'm not
Russell's
trying to be
testimony.
nefarious.
Why did you say nefarious? Anyway, go ahead.
So the inside experiments were with the pneumatic arm. And so they basically, here's what I loved about what they did. I'm going to do a comparison right now between ARCAA and ARCAA. So ARCAA got paid $400,000 and they went out and they bought John's jeans and t-shirt and sneakers and his hat. And they bought an exemplar Lexus. I don't know what they spent the $400,000 on, though.
Judd's time.
Exactly. The blue paint. ARCAA only got paid $50,000. They also bought, an exemplar, but they were smarter because they went out and they bought many taillight housings. Many. So that they could actually, because that was part of the cross that Alessi asked Welcher. He's, part of it when he was like, well, why didn't you get a crash test dummy? And he asked him why he didn't do the experiment going 24 miles an hour. And Welcher's response was, well, because we had to be very careful because we only had the one vehicle. We didn't want to damage it.
And instead, you could just buy 10 taillight housings and do whatever amount of experiments. And by the way, how fun was it? And I hate to use the word fun in a murder trial, but it was fun when he actually had a taillight housing in court and picked it up and showed it to everybody.
And it's huge. It's
substantial.
It's
beefy.
Huge. Yeah. So they did the two experiments on the inside and they took these housings and they basically affixed it to the pneumatic arm. And what I was impressed with were their high-speed cameras. Mm-hmm. They had a bunch of different camera angles that were able. And the other thing that they did, which I thought was very smart, and I think the jury, I'm hoping they picked up on this. They took the taillight housing and they actually put it in a freezer.
Yes.
And
for
got
every experiment.
For every experiment. They even had a guy outside holding dry ice on it to get it to the temperature that it was the night of the accident. Or whatever happened. The alleged accident. So I thought, they were really thorough in what they did. And then basically, they did this 24 mile an hour test and they used the rescuer Randy or Randy the rescuer.
The dummy's name is Randy and Hank called it a doll, which is insane.
Doll.
But they put sensors all over the thing, which is super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So once they did that final test, the diffuser damage, so that second layer of taillight, there were 2 cracks in it, and that was about it.
Right. And that was the impact that was likely, if there was an impact with John O'Keefe, as the Commonwealth is alleging, that was much more direct than a clip or a side swipe. It was a more direct impact on the arm. Now, we should mention to people listening, if they didn't see the illustrations today, what happened in Dr. Welcher's testing was that all he did was put blue paint on the taillight of the exemplar Lexus to illustrate that one could get wounds where John O'Keefe's wounds were by positioning their arm by choice in a way that lined up to the light. And anyone who saw the video of that experiment in no way proved the cuts could happen, that the punctures to the shirt could happen. All it proved was, yes, my elbow moves in such a way that it could get to the level of where the pain is. And I was so happy when Dr. Wolfe pointed that out today, that this experiment meant nothing. And I was actually, I know it came up in cross, but when you see the force testing and when you see the accident reconstruction testing with the real car, the idea that ARCAA didn't do any of that really blew my mind.
Well, I think we talked about it too. You know, even the guy on TikTok or whatever got the silicone arm with the bones in it.
Yes.
And did a very simple experiment. You would think these guys who are getting paid $400,000 who are engineers would have done some sort of similar test to that. And what I found interesting is that when they were showing the slow-mo of even the 10 mile an hour, the one that they did inside the lab. So you're you're up close on the dummy's arm in those tests. And when the taillight hits the arm, the wrist snaps back.
Oh, that wrist is broken. And I think that Rentschler is probably going to testify to that because Wolfe cannot testify to body stuff. Rentschler will probably have his own videos talking about that, even if it was a little clip.
But I think that's why Welcher was saying anything over 8 miles an hour. Welcher the other day, when Alessi asked him about bones breaking, and he said anything over 8 miles an hour might have broken a bone.
Right.
So we're watching a 10 mile an hour experiment, and you're close up on the arm and you see the wrist snap back.
You see it in all of them. It was really violent, actually.
Really violent. And I would say the most violent was the very last experiment that they did outside of the 29 mile an hour test. And they basically, they established that Wolfe was doing all of these experiments based solely on Welcher's report.
Right.
So the way the arm was held on, the tethers, the way the body was standing, where it was positioned, all that stuff, it's all based on what Welcher did. So they did one extra test where it was a full-on hit by the car.
Right.
As if John had been standing behind the car, which is awful to even think about. And if his mom was in the court, I'm sure this one really bothered her. I'm sure they all bothered her, but this one was really tough to watch because they basically put, Randy, the crash test dummy, and had a full-on hit with the back of the car. And when that happened, the car sustained a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Not to the taillight, some of it to the taillight, but mostly like dented in, back end,
rear
the entire
smashed.
back window smashed open. And then the crash test dummy hit the ground and slid like 100 feet. And, Brennan brings that up in cross later.
200-pound crash test dummy.
A 200-pound crash test dummy.
So before we move on to Brennan, I just want to talk about one other experiment that ARCAA did, which I didn't know was going to come up again, which was that they built the cannon to see if a thrown glass, hitting the taillight would create the same kind of damage. Now, since they did that experiment for the FBI, I'm wondering if at some point in internal filings or whatever, that was a theory that Karen hit John because he'd thrown a glass at her taillight or something. I can't figure out exactly why they would test that, but that must have been somebody's theory at the time. Likely, it was the prosecution because they were working from their stuff. Were you surprised how much time they spent on this glass situation?
No, because I thought when I first heard that testimony last year, I thought that makes sense to me because I honestly don't think that these engineers ever thought John was hit by a car.
Yeah.
They were trying to establish how that taillight was broken the way that it was.
Right.
And the only way that could happen is to have the velocity of this hard cocktail glass thrown at the bumper.
And even then, it doesn't look like the...
No.
Yeah.
So they tried it.
And as he asked him on the stand, were you aware that the glass found on the bumper doesn't match the glass of the cocktail glass? He says, no, I wasn't. You know why he wasn't aware of that? Because he wasn't aiming to do...
Right.
This, by the way, today we've heard several witnesses asked about the scientific method during this trial. I think today was the first time someone was asked about the scientific method and there was a chalk to demonstrate what it was. So it actually made sense. All right, so let's move on. Obviously, we're going to get more Wolfe Monday, so we'll have more opportunities to talk about him.
Well, we should talk about his opinions very quickly. He had basically Jackson was like, science, to the best, your best ability, scientific, blah, blah, blah. Is it your opinion that the damage to Karen's Lexus consisted with the impact to the right arm of John O'Keefe during a high-speed reverse maneuver? No. Is it your opinion relating to the punctures holes of the hoodie? Was damage consistent with impact from a right rear taillight? No. Did you ever see taillight pieces cut, fray, or puncture the hoodie? No. And then as far as a center of mass hit, was the damage to the Lexus consistent with that? And he said, no, it was inconsistent.
Right.
So basically he just said flat out, no, all of the experiments Welcher did, they are inconsistent with what would have actually happened.
Right. Can I tell you my one concern about all this?
Sure. Yeah.
Because juries are weird.
Yeah.
A jury might think, because this has happened on many other trials, well, it didn't happen the way the state says it happened, but it still could have happened.
Sure. Yeah.
So that is obviously one sort of latent concern that I have about this. But that being said, they are really set on this data. The data was the foundation of Brennan's case. And the data only supports this kind of collision because there's no collision in the data.
Well, and I think also the jury has to look at this and say, well, first of all, did you read any of Sue O'Connell's tweets today about jurors? Every single one of them were taking notes and they were into it.
Riveted.
They were listening, riveted. So I think that if it's a young jury, like we keep hearing, I don't think they're going to just buy what's being sold to them. And I think that at this point, they understand that what Hank Brennan is selling to them is coming through a snake oil salesman.
Well, if nothing else, they must understand that even if they are, I think some of the Commonwealth's points are, interesting, there's no way moving to cross that they can't detect. He is just sneering the entire time. The most respectful he's been was in some of his cross with Dr. Marie Russell. He tried really hard.
And with Kolakethis.
Actually, yeah. I mean, Kolakethis, he asked 2 questions and that was it. And Kolakethis was unimpeachably nice. He would have come off like an ogre if he had given her a hard time. But the same with Marie Russell's an old lady, right? No offense, Dr. Russell, but you are in fact an old lady. And when I'm your age, I will call myself an old lady. So, but he has this incredibly, it seems very personal and sneering. And you have to remember, I think what's important to remember is that when a defense attorney is fiery, the impression you might have is, all right, they're defending their client. Yeah. They're fiery because they have a cause here. When a prosecutor is this, and it's not fiery, it's legitimately snarky and sneering and mean. He comes off as, I'm a woman, obviously. As Turtle Boy pointed out, I'm a woman. And when I see a man, and I'm sorry to bring gender into this, those of you who are not tuned in for this kind of discourse. When I see a man behave this way to other men, to women, in anything, all I can think of is, what in the actual fuck? This is unnecessary. You can get to the same things without being abusive and mean.
Yeah, I felt the same way about Welcher, though. I feel like for some people, it's their sort of baseline that they think they have to get their point across by being a dick.
Yeah.
And Hank Brennan, I was trying to sit back and think about bias today. And I was thinking, because I know that Alan Jackson, like when he's crossing Buchanan or he's crossing Jen McCabe or Brian Albert, any of the sort of harder witnesses for him to cross, he too can come off, pretty sharp and say, and like make some snarky comments. And I don't think they're necessary. I appreciate them because I think it's funny. But when Hank Brennan does it, he had a lot of snarky side comments today, and Bev did not have a handle on him today. And I don't think she wanted to have a handle on him today.
Well, remember, she promised him a robust cross.
Yeah, but
she also promised the defense a robust cross of ARCCA, and they didn't really get it.
No, they certainly did not. And this is not a robust cross. This is just her, taking the leash off of him and allowing him to just sort of be an asshole to everybody. But the thing is, I want to believe, and I'm hoping that this is true, I want to believe that the jury is more than they're seeing the difference between Alan Jackson and Hank Brennan. I want them to see the difference between the witnesses.
Yes.
So when you've got Alan Jackson being rude to Jen McCabe, she started it. Yeah. You know what I mean?
So did Welcher.
When Alessi, a nice guy, Alessi being rude to Welcher, he started it.
Yeah.
When you've got Hank Brennan being rude to Dr. Wolfe, and he's just like, why are you doing this to me?
Being like this?
Or like the moment that Dr. Russell, you know, when she was so shocked by the memory question. Yeah.
No.
Like, why are you doing this? And I feel like the jury's with the witness there. Like, they can see that Dr. Wolfe is a very well-spoken, really intelligent, really smart guy who this is his job, and he does it for big companies, including the feds. And I'm sure they've figured that out by now.
Oh, I'm so glad at all the mentions of the FBI that have been slipped into this trial, because now when they say another organization, the jury knows. They just, if they don't know, they're not listening, but they have to, especially after Dever's testimony.
Dever. Yeah, she said FBI, but they also have been referring, even today, I think Hank even called them agents.
Yeah.
You know,
which is a mistake for Hank to do, not a mistake when the defense attorneys do it. They go, agents. Oh, I'm sorry. Representatives.
Yeah. Law enforcement representatives.
Yeah.
No, but so I think, you know, I knew that he was going to come out of the gate. I'm talking about Hank Brennan. I knew he was going to come out of the gate and he was going to go right after. I assumed he was going to go right for the signal, but he went personal. I think his ego is so bruised about what they did to Burgess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he started with that. His questioning today with Wolfe started. So yeah, you know, you went over a bunch of things in your direct about your education and your background, but you failed to mention that, you know, you only mentioned that ARCAA works for the NHL and, you know, the Department of Defense, but they did all that before you got there, right? Like, he basically was like, you didn't have anything to do with that.
Right.
And that's when he was like, I mean, you mostly do insurance companies. So he was really trying to like hammer that point home that it was insurance.
You know, this is something Hank tells on himself. When in arguing his motions before this trial, he told on himself in terms of his own strategy for the trial. How many times in motion arguments did he talk about dehumanizing witnesses? The defense's attempt to dehumanize witnesses. That's all he does. How many times did he talk about trial by ambush? How many times did he talk about... That's just him telling on himself. It's completely unnecessary. I mean, you can be, when you look at the effectiveness of witnesses, it's the ones who are unflappable, the ones who are consciously trying to be helpful, trying to answer questions accurately. And I think about the lab techs for the Commonwealth. Like, they're great examples of this. Irini Scortibello is a great example of this. And I'm not just saying this because they have information that's, quote, helpful to the defense, because they don't particularly. They just have information.
Yeah.
And they're like, my job is to be here today to talk about this thing.
Absolutely.
And the defense did not dehumanize them. They didn't say, so tell me how you learned in graduate school how to use a spatula to scrape off weren't they doing that before you got there? It's just dickish. It's mean.
Yeah. And he even brought up, there was a part, I forget exactly what it was in reference to, but he was talking about Dr. Wolfe having to retake a portion of one of his exams.
I'd love to know how long it took Hank to pass the Massachusetts bar.
I know. I was just like, oh, God, this guy. And then he immediately went into his wife. And I was just shocked that he went there.
Yeah.
Because he knows at this point, Hank Brennan knows what the internet trolls are going to do to Dr. Wolfe's family.
That's why it's so out of bounds.
Yeah. And the fact that Bev let him do that, I'm just like...
He did the same thing to Lucky Loughran. He's basically inviting... attacks on Lucky Loughran. And today he invited more internet attacks on this man's family. And that is dehumanizing, and it is not about the evidence, and it's not about his expertise. It's gross. And
it is gross.
Yeah, it's real gross.
And we should, and I don't know how much the audience knows about this because it came up in the voir dire, but basically after Wolfe testified in the last trial, the anti-Karen Read people really went after him and his family and his kids. Yep. Like, they doxed him. They were posting pictures of them online. And this is a guy, he's a scientist who was hired by the government to look into corruption in Canton, Massachusetts.
Yeah, but you know that the harder they go after people, the more scared they are of those people.
Yeah, of course. But now it's going to happen all over again. And I'm actually kind of worried about him. So anyway, I have to say, one of the things about the cross that I think just went really flat, one of the many things that went flat for Hank Brennan, I don't think the signal thing, I don't think that had any weight to it. When he finally did get to it, I don't think it was as big of a punch as he thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Because Wolfe was able to be like, yes, I was asked to give you all of my text messages, but every time I finish a job with a client, I erase it. That's what I do. But when I was asked to provide all my texts, I went ahead and got in touch with my carrier, and this is all they could give me.
Yeah.
And then he was completely dismissive about Signal. He's like, they asked me to use it. I don't know why. We did. That's that.
I know why.
But Hank, yeah. I know.
Wouldn't you, if you were on this defense team, be only using encrypted communication with everybody?
Absolutely.
Which, by the way, I just want to stress is not nefarious.
No.
It is a way to keep your work product from leaking. And I have never seen such disrespect and disregard for attorney-client work product ever in the history of any trial that I have ever paid attention to since I began writing true crime in 2007. I have never, ever seen such disregard for work product, which is essentially like typically this very protected part of the attorney-client relationship.
Yeah.
And, things that are considered work product are like the notes that a lawyer would take, the phone call that they would have with somebody. Yep. And they're just... The ability of Hank Brennan to make it an issue is wild to me. And you notice the defense doesn't. They've asked for this now once. They have a new motion where they've asked for disclosure of communications between the Commonwealth and ARCCA as it regards to the responsive testing that they are doing as a result of this.
Yeah.
And Hank Brennan and his team wrote the most strenuous opposition to that. And it's like, what in the actual fuck are you talking about?
Well, I mean, meanwhile, Hank is getting random tweets from, anti-Karen Read internet trolls and using them in court, using them as if they're actual evidence in court.
Yes.
And I'm just, I don't understand
This is what I said. He is asking questions based on things I saw on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah.
Almost every day he does that. And did you see the weird interaction he had with that woman who was like John O'Keefe's ex-girlfriend from 20 plus years ago, who's like...
Hank Brennan?
Yes.
No.
So in court, this wasn't today.
Oh, I did. I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't understand
acknowledging and everything short of winking at this
the
woman.
redheaded woman who's in the ID documentary who dated John when they were in high school.
Which... I am really looking forward to going back on court TV if I'm asked this question and being able to give the not take but observation that the only people speaking up for Karen Read's guilt, all of them, none of them are Boston cops. The only cops, the only people that you hear in law enforcement talking about her guilt are the people who literally investigated the case. John O'Keefe's boss is not giving interviews about how wonderful he was and how they really want this person. And granted, I know there are rules around that kind of thing, but you usually even see like ex-cops. Like you see if they can't get somebody, the only people they have been able to connect to this in all these media projects have a weird, tenuous personal relationship with John O'Keefe that they are now, for lack of a better word, exercising and exploiting in order to create a sense that they're an expert or that they would know. And the idea that this girlfriend of his from 20 years ago that hasn't been dating him recently is now a champion for the truth around his case is so wild to me. And that Hank Brennan...
she sits in court every single day.
She sits in court almost every day. She's with Paul O'Keefe and she wears John O'Keefe's badge number on a big necklace. I'm sorry, it's weird. It's real weird.
But tell the audience, because I don't know if the audience knows about, I know what you're talking about, but tell the audience what the moment
so there was
there
was a point in court where this was 2 days ago, right? Where he's like walking up after a contentious, like,
it was a sidebar,
right?
Yeah.
And Yannetti wasn't happy and blah, blah, blah. And he like sort of like looks at her and she looks like she's like flustered, like a schoolgirl with a crush on a high school quarterback. Like, and I'm not.
And he winked at her.
Yes, I'm not saying they're having a relationship. What I'm saying is it is wildly inappropriate for him to be interacting with people in the gallery. Yes, and the optics of that are so bad. I mean, if Jen Coffendander was sitting there in court, he'd be winking at her, giving her the thumbs up?
Ooh, I don't know. It's difficult because there's so much stuff that happens outside of this case on the internet and on the front steps of the courthouse. And because it's a small town, there are so many people involved and connected to this case. Speaking of which, I'm sure that you've heard about the connection that Dever Deaver may have.
Yes, that Dever Deaver might be
Matt McCabe's
second cousin.
Yep.
And this person who discovered that actually posted some obituary material showing that like her grandfather was like his uncle or something like that. Yeah, it's fucked up. If true, fucked up, and it seems to be maybe true.
I think it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I haven't vetted it myself, but I think that this case is so incestuous.
Yep.
If you've got the prosecutor making eyes and winking at one of John's ex-girlfriends from 20 years ago who's sitting in the box with his mom and his brother while he's on the way to the sidebar with who the people call Ani Bev. I mean, we've talked about this in depth. I mean, this is what we've been talking about for years now, but it's just, this whole case has a really shitty look. And so far, the only people who are outsiders are the only ones who I feel like are telling the truth.
Right.
And so that's Officer Barrows. That is Karita Kolakithis. That is, all of the scientist nerds and Dr. Russell, everybody. They're the ones who I believe and who I think are telling the truth. And anybody who is connected to this case on a grassroots level that is from Canton or, within that community, I just don't trust them. Mm-hmm. Even Lucky could be compromised if the story were twisted just enough.
Right. Yep.
And unfortunately, that's what Turtle Boy was trying to do in the beginning, is by saying, at the end of that article that he posted about Lucky, I can't remember what he said. It was something along the lines of, if this is all true, then Lucky is just as guilty or whatever.
Right.
He said.
Right.
So, it's just twisted. And I actually worry about these people when this is finally over.
Same.
Because it's like, what the hell are they going to do with their lives?
Well, they're famous now in a way that like nobody would want to be. And I just want to say that people online saying shit about Lucky Loughran, like they're talking about his mental capacity. They're talking about his affect. And it's just like, what in the mother loving hell are you thinking? And I know that there are pro Karen Reed people who are very ugly too online. Yeah. I know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the anti-Karen Reed people have a glee about them when it comes to the personal attacks around witnesses. And these are the same people who crow about what a horrible person Aidan Carney is for doing blogs and so-called witness intimidation by encouraging people to throw ducks around town. Like,
right.
They're literally like Twitter post, Lucky should just kill himself. Lucky should just, it's unbelievable. Anyway. All right. So Monday, we're going to get more redirect of Dr. Wolfe. And it seems like there's going to be more evidence that he's going to be able to show as a result of the redirect because Hank Brennan opened the door to some things. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yes.
Then we're going to get Dr. Rentschler. It seems like they're going to rest their case after that, which is surprising to me because I really want to hear from this medical examiner lady, like very badly.
Well, what Bev asked the jury at the end, did you hear that part?
Yes, I think it's stay all day Thursday.
So to me, it sounds like we're going to have closing arguments on Thursday.
Potentially, yeah.
Or Friday, maybe.
So if they're going to finish Wolfe Monday, bring in Rentschler, and then maybe finish him Tuesday, and then I really want them to bring in this lady. I really do.
The pathologist. I'm hoping they don't bring in Green.
Yeah, they don't need to, I don't think. Jen McCabe is gone and forgotten at this point.
Yeah.
Jen McCabe is let me see how this could have, the fact that he brought Jen McCabe at all is the only reason we're talking about Jen McCabe. He only brought Jen McCabe in because he had hired these people for $400,000 to do all this testing. Let's be real.
I'm still very frustrated that we are not going to hear. I started thinking about it more last night, and I really think that we need to hear from Higgins.
Higgy. Oh, we'll see. All right.
I do. But there was one little mind-blowy thing that happened at the end that I wanted to bring up. Because I feel like, when you and I were texting earlier and you're like, we were talking about how Hank's cross was going. And I was like, the entire cross has just been about the difference in weight from John's arm to the crash test dummy's arm.
So dumb.
That was the whole thing. That's what he spent his entire cross on. And I was like, this is so ridiculous. And then Alan Jackson gets up and in 5 minutes he goes, do you know how much John's arm weighed? Just his arm. And he was like, no, I don't. I mean, I've been told by Hank Brennan that it weighed 11.8 pounds. And he's like, you realize that's a statistic, right? And I didn't realize what he meant by that.
It's that a person of his size, their arm would weigh X. Is that what it means?
So I went online and I looked it up and I'm like, how do you determine how much an adult human being's arm weighs? And it says somewhere between 5 and 6% of their body weight. So I multiplied 216 pounds by 5.5%. And it's 11.8.
Yeah.
So Hank Brennan went on the friggin' internet, and I'm sure that Welcher's the one who told him to do this.
Yep.
He went on the internet, figured out the percentage of what John's arm could weigh, and was using that in front of the jury as if it was factual.
That's right. And he was also talking about shitty science. Like if you used a dummy that his arm weighed less, you should subtract 26% from all of your findings. And Wolfe was like, not how physics works, dude. Not how physics works.
But also, that doesn't even matter because no one knows how much John's arm weighs.
Right.
No one can know what John, unless, they weigh it by itself.
But an anti-Karen Read person will say, see, though, that means he could have caused more damage to the taillight.
Of course it will. But then Alan Jackson got up and was like, but no one can know how much his, and it doesn't really matter anyway. He did it in about 2 minutes. And then one of the only other things that Brennan did in his cross that I thought was really disingenuous again was he showed on the screen pictures of Randy the rescuer, and it was after the direct hit. So Randy had gone about 100 feet on the asphalt, and where he landed, the hoodie he was wearing, so John's hoodie was all torn up. And it was just a mess, right? And so he's showing this on the screen.
You mean the John's hoodie from Rescue Randy?
From Rescue Randy.
Yeah.
Was all torn up. And he's showing this on the screen to the jury. And he's saying to Dr. Wolfe, but you said there was no damage to the hoodie. And he's like, yeah, there were no puncture holes. There were no punctures in the sweatshirt from the tests that we did that were side swipes or just, lower impact. But this was a direct impact. And this crash test dummy basically skidded 100 feet away on his stomach on the asphalt. And so what you're looking at is road rash. Yeah. And John O'Keefe didn't have any of that.
Right. And then Jackson was able to say, can we look at the whole sweatshirt, Rescue Randy?
Yeah.
If he didn't show you just that one part, what would the whole sweatshirt have looked like? Basically saying so this is what John O'Keefe's sweatshirt should have looked like.
Yeah. So it sounds like on Monday, we're going to finish up with Wolfe and we'll probably get into Dr. Rentschler. And I think that's probably going to be it for Monday.
Yeah. Also a cutie, by the way. Just in a superficial part of the podcast. Just going to throw it out there. All right.
He's more of a daddy.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, he's older.
So Mel, will you be watching the trial on Monday?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, well, then we'll talk about it Monday.
I'm so fascinated by where we're going right now in this redirect because I think I said to you today, and I said this actually online, I think the case is closed at this point. I think the defense could stop after ARCAA.
I really think they need the pathologist to talk about the body cooling stuff. I will say if there's one witness.
Yeah.
I think she should be the final witness, in my opinion.
Here's the only thing I'll say about that, though. I think right now, if we were to focus solely on the data of the crash, like if that were the only thing that we were trying to determine, the data of the crash, and not the conspiracy that there might have been a third party culprit. Because the only thing I worry about...
They've let that go. Yeah.
They have. But if they bring the pathologist in, that comes back into play. They haven't totally let it go because they had the Higgins video.
Yep.
It's almost like they're just sprinkling it on top of the data they have.
Right. Intimating this is what could have happened instead without hammering it home.
And I just don't want the jury to get confused. So if we're talking, if the pathologist tells the jury... John was taken from a warm place to outside to a cold place. What does that mean to them? Mm-hmm. And how does that play into the story they've been told by both sides?
Well, it means he wasn't hit by a car outside and left to die in the snow. That's what it means.
Right.
That's the only thing it means.
Then, is the jury going to be like, well, then why didn't anybody else come up here and tell us who could have done this?
Well, then Hank Brennan is going to say, but couldn't the warm place have been Karen Read's car? He's anyway. All right. So anyway. Monday, you're going to be watching. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be watching. I know we'll be talking about it, and then we will reconvene.
Yes.
And have a discussion. Mel Barrett, Thank you so much for joining me on this dimple-filled day.
Dimple-filled
of the
day.
You're pretty dimple yourself. Just want to throw it out there.
I got a couple of little dimples.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk Monday.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Mel.
All right.